Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Hi, this is Kevin here from Personal Tutors once again, narrating you the story of a chapter from Standard 11, Snapshot, The Tale of Melon City. Now, this story is a sarcastic and a humorous attempt by Vikram Seth to go ahead and give out a brief explanation of what the citizens today seek and aspire. It's a story about a good and kind king who actually never went ahead and indulged in the livings of his citizens. He went ahead and, in spite of being the king, had led a very calm and quiet life and let his citizens enjoy a peaceful gesture in his kingdom. Once the king got a frenzy of creating an ark at the thresholds of the entrance of the city. It goes like that the ark was built, yet one day the king, while traveling through the roads, happened to go through the ark, and accidentally and incidentally his throne fell off. The king was really feeling bad about the crown falling off to the ground, as well as being dejected by people around and laughing around. The king really went ahead and ordered to punish the people involved in building up the ark so low. Thus, the arrangements were made to hang the one responsible. The chief of the builders was called, and everything was made ready to hang him out. Yet the person went ahead and, in spite of being hanged, proclaimed and awaited the threatening of being hanged to the laborers who did the wrong job. The laborers, when questioned about building up a low ark, went ahead and blamed the bricks. Funny enough here, when it was known that why were the bricks so small used to build the ark, it was the masons who were involved, and the masons who were actually going ahead and being blamed. Yet on the contrary of the masons ready to be hanged, put in the blame on the architect. Well, friends, the architect, the poor chap, brought in front of the king, was shivering around and went ahead and proclaimed that it was actually the king who made the final changes in the manuscript of the ark being built. Now, the person who brought in the changes in the designs was the king himself. So the king was supposed to be hanged. The king was a bit perplexed, and being the protagonist of the story, was really feeling excited yet blurred with what to do. Thus the king went ahead and asked him to bring a wise man to give the decision that who actually is the culprit and who should be hung. A petty old fellow, barely able to stand up, was brought into the scene, and he blamed that it was actually the ark's fault. Thus the ark should be hung. Well, accidentally, the ark should be hung. It actually went ahead, and the ministers overheard people getting wacky out there in order to go ahead and see somebody to be hung, because they were all there together to see someone to be hung rather than watching an ark to be hung and feeling it all that. So to go ahead and stop the tyranny and the riots, they decided that they would be going ahead and measuring a person who's equal to the rope and then going ahead and hanging him, at least because it was the citizens who were actually gathering just to see somebody being hung and not the ark to be hung. Thus, everybody of the same height was supposed to be called, and they were like to be measured, that who is equal to the rope that are the strings that were tied, and infuriatingly, it was the king that who measured exactly to the thresholds. Thus, the king was hung. The citizens didn't even care about the king being hung, and the king, being so polite, accepted the idea of hanging himself to death, because the citizens out there were for the view of someone being hung. Friends, this left the whole kingdom without a king. Thus, people were looking forward to have a king with them. And as an Affinity said, the first person to walk out the doors of the city would be asked whom the king should be made. There was this idiotic fellow, a lunatic, walking out there, who always had a crave for melons. When asked who should be made the king. As usual, he spoke the Melon. Thus, a Melon was chosen and kept on a throne with a crown and named as the king of the city. The people actually were quite happy because this king did not involve in any of the kingdom's issues. It did not involve in any of the citizens' issues. It just sat there and acted as a king, and the citizens were happily serving him as a king. That's it. So the story is a satirical humor by Mr. Vikram Seth. We shall discuss now a few question and answers that will be going ahead and giving us an elaborate picture of the story. Now, the first question is, narrate the tale of the Melon City in your own words. I've already gone ahead and given you a brief about the story, so I would suggest you to write it in your own narrative words. That would be a very good thing to do. The next question here is, what impression would you form of a state where the king was just calm and placid? Well, a king, supposedly being a person who rules the state, has to be calm and placid. Yes, the kingdom that we suppose would be perfect, a harmonious one where religion would be given importance, people would be given importance, citizens would be given equal rights, and the king himself would not be a tyrannical fellow. Rather, he would be a person who would be placid and calm enough to understand people's feeling, the needs of the society, the needs of the kingdom, and various other issues. Whereas a kingdom that's constantly on a war and has a vivid issues in it really goes ahead and thrives on its own nation's people's strength, effort, money. This state where the king was basically called an idealistic state, where the king was really symbolic of not interfering into the matters of his citizen. Rather, the king was happy in his own life, had a placid life, lived a nice way, had a calm attitude towards the kingdom. Everything was going fine. Thus, we can recollect with the question that the kingdom was really calm and placid. How, according to you, can peace and liberty be maintained in a state? Well, peace and liberty can be maintained in a state where exactly the laissez-faire is a term. Laissez-faire is a term given to a state where actually the king does not get involved in the daily routine of the citizens. The king does not go ahead and indulge his personal orders, his rules and regulations in the daily living of the people. The state that actually goes ahead and has this policy involved is actually a state where peace and harmony prevails at lot level. Yet I would suggest that ironically the opposite also has to be mentioned at times. For instance, let's take a king who is neither involved in the state matters nor involved in any of the citizens' matters, his living his own life without any foundations of the citizens and their issues. Sounds a bit creepy to me. So these are the ironical presentation towards this question. The next question is, suggest a few instances in the poem which highlight humor and irony. Well, humor. This poem is actually full of humor, where the humor starts by the blame game giving upon the architects, the masons, the laborers, the brickmakers, and the king at the end. The second instance here goes ahead and actually implies on the notion of the ark being hung, a monument being hung. We can't just believe it. Personally, guys, I can't digest the fact. Ark being hung sounds a bit cocky. The third instance is where a lunatic is asked who to make the king, and the fellow, just in love with melons, names a melon to be the king, and the citizens accepting the melon to be the king, thus the city being called the Melon City. Now, these are certain instances that this story really depicts. Mr. Seth, a person of a virtue, really goes on sarcastic comments on the societal values, depicts numerous points in the story where he actually comments on a state where the politicians and the current citizens rely on. I would suggest you to go ahead and read the chapter and have a summary. If you want to know something more, just comment below. Want to know something about personal tutors, you can just press the About Us button. If you want the data online, you can request it, or you can request it in a pen drive. Signing off today, I'm Kevin. Thanks for listening.